Welcome to the channel. Before we begin, please consider liking and subscribing to the channel. It means the world to me as I can continue to write stories like these. I will not spoil it, but I think the ending will leave you shocked. Let me know if you enjoyed it in the comments, and don't forget to let me know where you're watching from.
The blizzard's grip. The wind howled like a banshee, ripping at Dusty's thin coat as she pushed open the ranch house door. Snow, thick as wool, plastered itself to her face the moment she stepped outside. The blizzard had arrived with a vengeance, a swirling white chaos that swallowed the familiar landscape. She squinted, trying to pierce the blinding curtain, her breath frosting in the frigid air. Her calves were unaccounted for, and the thought of them alone, shivering in this maelstrom, spurred her into action. She adjusted her crutches, the worn wood cold against her palms. Each step was a battle. The wind buffeted her, threatening to topple her over, and the snowdrifts were already thigh-high in places. With a grunt, she plunged one crutch forward, only to have it sink deep into the yielding snow. She hauled it out with a sucking sound, the effort sending a jolt of pain through her shoulder. "Blast it all," she muttered, her voice lost in the wind's roar. She pressed on, her gaze sweeping the white expanse. The flakes stung her eyes, making it nearly impossible to see. She knew the calves wouldn't have wandered far, they were too young, too dependent on their mothers. But finding them in this whiteout felt like searching for needles in a haystack. Another step, another plunge. This time, the crutch went in deeper, snagging on something beneath the snow. Dusty strained, tugging with all her might, but the crutch wouldn't budge. Panic flickered in her chest. If she lost her crutch out here, with a desperate surge of strength, she yanked again. The crutch came free with a violent jerk, throwing her off balance. She stumbled, her good legs slipping on the ice beneath the snow, and landed hard, the wind knocked out of her. For a moment, she lay there, gasping for air, the cold seeping into her bones. The blizzard seemed to mock her, the wind howling louder, the snow falling harder. Doubt gnawed at her. Maybe she should turn back. Maybe the calves were already... No, she couldn't give up. Those calves depended on her. She pushed herself back to her feet, her muscles screaming in protest. She had to keep going. She adjusted her grip on the crutches and continued her agonizing trek, angling toward the frozen creek, a landmark she hoped the calves might have sought shelter near. The going was even tougher now. The snow was deeper, the wind stronger, and her energy was rapidly draining. Each step was a monumental effort. Her crutches sank deeper and deeper, requiring her to use every ounce of strength to pull them free. Her breath came in ragged gasps and her vision blurred. The cold had burrowed deep into her, numbing her fingers and toes. She pressed on, driven by a desperate hope, but her body was reaching its limit. Her left leg throbbed, her shoulders ached, and her stomach growled with hunger. She hadn't eaten since early morning, and the lack of sustenance was taking its toll. The creek was still a good distance away, but she could no longer distinguish it from the surrounding white. Everything was a blur of swirling snow, a disorienting landscape that offered no solace, no hope. Then it happened. Her crutch slipped on a patch of ice hidden beneath the snow, and she went down hard. This time, she didn't have the strength to get back up. She lay there, sprawled in the snow, the wind whipping around her, the cold seeping into her very core. Her body trembled uncontrollably. She closed her eyes, exhaustion overwhelming her. The image of the calves, huddled and shivering, flashed through her mind, but even that wasn't enough to spur her into action. She was too tired, too cold, too defeated. She drifted in and out of consciousness, the blizzard a relentless lullaby. She imagined she could feel the icy grip of death closing around her. It wasn't so bad, actually. Just sleep. A whimper escaped her lips, a sound swallowed by the wind. She was alone. Utterly, terrifyingly alone. And the blizzard tightened its grip. A chance encounter. The wind shrieked, a predatory cry clawing at Silas's coat. Copper trudged on, his breath blooming in the frigid air, each footfall deliberate. Snow, a dizzying white shroud, limited visibility to mere feet. This was madness. No one with sense ventured out in this weather. But a handful of cattle had strayed to the far pasture, and abandoning them was unthinkable. Coppa's ears flicked, he slowed, a subtle resistance. "What is it, boy?" Silas murmured, leaning forward. The gelding nudged something buried in the drift near the creek. Silas's gut clenched. A form lay sprawled there, nearly swallowed by the snow. He urged Copper closer, the horse picking a careful path. A human shape materialized. A woman. Dismounting, Silas felt the cold's immediate sting as he knelt. Her face, framed by snow-plastered dark hair, possessed a fragile pallor. Dusty, The woman from town. The one who always navigated life on crutches. What calamity had brought her here? He hesitated, then touched her cheek. An icy shock. She had to be moved. Dusty, he called, his voice a strained thread against the wind's howl. Can you hear me? Silence. Miles from the ranch, and she wouldn't last. One option remained. He carefully gathered her, surprised by her lightness, her body rigid from the cold. He cradled her close, a paltry shield against the elements as he struggled upright. Copper stood steady, his eyes reflecting preternatural calm. Easy, boy, Silas rasped. He managed to settle Dusty across the saddle, her weightless form supported by Copper's broad back. Securing her as best he could, he offered a silent prayer against a fall. He swung up behind, his own bulk offering added warmth. His arm encircled her waist, a protective band. All right, Copper, he said, his voice resolute. Let's get home. Without hesitation, Copper turned, his hoofs punching into the deepening snow. The gale seemed to intensify, as if provoked by their defiance. Silas braced into the onslaught, his gaze locked on the faint promise of the ranch house glimmering in the distance. The journey was a trial. The wind pummeled them relentlessly, and the snowfall obscured the already treacherous route. Silas concentrated on Dusty's precarious security, his muscles screaming in protest. He murmured constant reassurances to Copper, a steady cadence aimed at both horse and himself. A stolen glance at Dusty revealed closed eyes, shallow breaths. He pressed Copper onward, fear tightening its grip. He had to get her inside into warmth. Finally, after what felt like an age, the hazy radiance of the ranch house pierced the swirling white. A wave of relief washed over Silas, almost buckling his knees. He nudged Copper faster, their pace quickening towards the barn. Safe inside, shielded from the wind's fury, Silas dismounted gingerly, his legs protesting. He lifted Dusty from the saddle, his arms trembling with exhaustion. He carried her into the house, his heart a frantic drum. The house's warmth enveloped him, a comforting blend of wood smoke and simmering stew. He laid Dusty gently on the sofa before the pot-bellied stove, its surface radiating blessed heat. Kneeling beside her, he sought a pulse at her wrist. Faint, but present. He exhaled raggedly, overwhelmed by gratitude. He shed her sodden clothes, cocooning her in a thick woolen blanket. He stoked the fire, feeding it until the stove pulsed crimson. With a warm, damp cloth, he gently cleansed her face. Her eyelids flickered. Dusty, he murmured softly. Can you hear me? Her eyes fluttered open, glazed with confusion. She blinked, her gaze slowly focusing on him. Where? She rasped, her voice a dry whisper. You're at my ranch, Silas replied gently. You're safe now. Warmth and welcome. The ranch house glowed like a beacon, its windows warm against the swirling white. Silas dismounted, his muscles screaming in protest, and then gently lifted Dusty from the saddle. Her weight was a feather in his arms, a chilling reminder of how close she'd been to oblivion. He carried her towards the porch, the wind biting at any exposed skin. The door swung open before they reached it, revealing a woman framed in the golden light. Martha, her face etched with worry, rushed forward. Silas! What in heaven's name? Her eyes fell on Dusty, and her expression softened with immediate concern. Bring her in quickly. Inside, the air was thick with the aroma of wood smoke and something savory simmering on the stove. Martha, all brisk efficiency, guided Silas to a settee near the roaring fireplace. Lay her down here, Silas. You look half frozen yourself. He obliged, carefully placing Dusty on the worn cushions. Her face was still pale, but a faint flush had returned to her cheeks. Martha was already kneeling beside her, her hands gentle as she checked Dusty's pulse. She's alive, Martha declared, relief evident in her voice. Just barely. Silas, get those wet clothes off her. I'll fetch some blankets and hot broth. Silas hesitated, a blush creeping up his neck. Perhaps you should do that, Martha. Martha chuckled, a warm, motherly sound. Don't be daft, Silas. I've seen more of the world than you think. Now, shoo. Get yourself warmed up, too. He retreated to the fireplace, feeling awkward but grateful for Martha's practical nature. He watched as she efficiently stripped Dusty of her sodden coat and boots, then wrapped her in thick woolen blankets. Soon, Dusty was propped up slightly, sipping cautiously from a steaming mug. The broth seemed to revive her. Her eyes fluttered open, focusing on Martha's kind face. Where am I? She whispered, her voice raspy. You're safe now, dear, Martha soothed. You're at Blackwood Ranch. Silas found you out in the storm. Dusty's gaze shifted to Silas, who was now standing a respectful distance away. Recognition dawned in her eyes, followed by a wave of emotion. "Silas, you saved me." He simply nodded, unable to articulate the reasons that had driven him to risk his own life. Martha bustled off, returning moments later with a stack of dry clothes. "Here, dear. These are some of my old things. They might be a bit big, but they're warm and dry." Dusty looked at the clothes, then back at Martha, her eyes welling up with tears. I don't know how to thank you." "Nonsense," Martha said briskly. "Just getting warm and well is thanks enough. Now, let's get you changed. There's a screen over there if you want some privacy." With Martha's help, Dusty managed to change into the warm, oversized clothes. The simple act of wearing something dry and clean seemed to breathe new life into her. She sat back on the settee, the blankets pulled snugly around her, and took another sip of the broth. The warmth spread through her, chasing away the lingering chill. Silas watched her, a silent observer. He noticed the tremor in her hands had lessened, and the color in her face was steadily returning. He felt a strange sense of satisfaction, a quiet pride in having been able to help. "Thank you," Dusty said again, her voice stronger this time. "Both of you. I don't know what would have happened if Silas hadn't found me." She paused, her gaze fixed on the fire. I was giving up." Martha patted her hand. "Well, you're not giving up now. You're here, you're safe, and we're going to take care of you." Dusty looked up at Martha, her eyes filled with gratitude. Then she turned to Silas, her gaze lingering on his face. "I owe you my life, Silas Blackwood." He shifted uncomfortably, unsure how to respond. "You don't owe me anything, Dusty. I just did what anyone would have done." But Dusty knew, and he suspected Silas knew too, that not everyone would have braved the blizzard to save a stranger. A helping hand. The lowing of cattle echoed in the barn, a chorus of anxious mothers and bewildered calves. Dusty, leaning heavily on her crutches, navigated the straw-strewn aisle, her gaze sweeping over the pens Silas had hastily constructed. The air hung thick with the smell of hay, manure, and lanolin, a potent mix that spoke of life and survival. She paused before a pen containing 3 calves, each shivering despite the thick layer of straw. Their ribs were prominent beneath their matted coats, and their eyes, wide and unfocused, reflected the trauma of the storm. Silas was there, kneeling, attempting to coax one of the calves to drink from a bottle. The calf stubbornly refused, its head lolling weakly. "They're still in shock," Dusty observed, her voice quiet but firm. Silas looked up, his brow furrowed with concern. "I can't seem to get them to take anything. Martha's warming milk," but he trailed off, frustration evident in his tone. Dusty shifted her weight, adjusting her grip on her crutches. "Try molasses. A little bit in the milk. It'll give them a quick energy boost and might tempt them to drink." Silas's eyes widened. "Molasses? I wouldn't have thought of that." He rose, brushing hay from his knees. "Worth a shot. Be right back." He disappeared into the adjacent feed room, returning moments later with a jar of thick, dark molasses. Dusty watched as he mixed a spoonful into the warm milk, the sweet scent mingling with the earthy aroma of the barn. He offered the bottle to the same calf, and this time the calf nudged the nipple tentatively. After a moment's hesitation, it began to suckle, its tail twitching weakly. A slow smile spread across Silas's face. "You're a miracle worker." Dusty shrugged, a faint blush rising on her cheeks. "Just know a thing or two about cattle." She hobbled to the next pen, where a larger calf was separated from its mother. The mother paced restlessly, her anxious mooing filling the air. The calf, though seemingly stronger than the others, remained huddled in a corner, its breathing ragged. "That one's got pneumonia brewing," Dusty said, pointing to the calf's labored breaths. "The cold got to its lungs. Needs a shot of penicillin and keep it warm and dry." Silas's eyebrows shot up in surprise. "You can tell just by looking?" "Spend enough time around sick cattle to recognize the signs," Dusty replied, her gaze unwavering. "And listen to its breathing. It's raspy." Silas listened intently, his expression thoughtful. He retrieved his stethoscope from his coat pocket, placing the cold metal against the calf's chest. He listened for a long moment, his brow furrowing deeper. "You're right," he said finally, his voice laced with admiration. "Definitely pneumonia. I'll get Doc Henderson out here tomorrow, but I can give it a shot now." "Do you know the dosage?" Dusty nodded. "Depends on the weight, but I'd say about 5 cc's should do it." Silas retrieved his medical kit, his movements efficient and practiced. As he prepared the injection, Dusty continued to offer advice, pointing out subtle signs of distress in the other calves, suggesting ways to improve their bedding, and recommending a specific electrolyte solution to combat dehydration. Silas listened attentively, absorbing every word. He'd grown up around cattle, but Dusty possessed a depth of knowledge that surprised and impressed him. It wasn't just book learning, it was the wisdom gleaned from years of hands-on experience and intimate understanding of the animals and their needs. As Silas administered the penicillin, the calf flinched but remained relatively calm, seemingly soothed by Dusty's presence. She stroked its head gently, murmuring soft words of comfort. "You've got a real gift with these animals," Silas said, capping the syringe. "I'm grateful for your help, Dusty. More grateful than I can say." Dusty met his gaze, her eyes filled with a quiet strength. "They just need a little care. A little attention." The barn door creaked open and Martha entered, carrying a steaming pot. "I brought some hot broth," she announced, her eyes crinkling at the corners as she took in the scene. "Thought you two could use a bit of warmth." Silas smiled. "Perfect timing, Martha. Dusty's been a lifesaver. We'd be lost without her." Martha beamed, her gaze shifting between Silas and Dusty. "I knew she was special the moment I saw her. Come now, let's get you both warmed up. And then, Dusty, perhaps you can tell me more about these calves. I'm always eager to learn." As they gathered around the pot of broth, sharing stories and offering comfort to the rescued animals, a sense of camaraderie filled the barn, a bond forged in the shared struggle against the unforgiving elements. Dusty, once a solitary figure battling the storm, found herself surrounded by warmth, acceptance, and a newfound sense of purpose. The debt she felt towards Silas remained, but it was now intertwined with a growing sense of belonging, a feeling that perhaps, just perhaps, she had finally found a place to call home. Evenings by the stove. The aroma of simmering stew clung to the air, a comforting blanket against the lingering chill seeping in from the Wyoming night. Dusty sat at the worn wooden table, her leg propped on a stool Silas had fashioned for her. The ache was a dull throb now, a constant reminder of her foolish bravery, or perhaps her unwavering dedication. She preferred to think of it as the latter. Silas ladled the stew into 2 bowls, the clatter of the spoon against ceramic the only sound besides the crackling fire in the pot-bellied stove. He placed a bowl in front of her, the steam swirling around her face, carrying with it the scent of beef, carrots, and something subtly spicy she couldn't quite place. "Thank you," she murmured, picking up her spoon. The stew was thick and hearty, each bite a welcome warmth spreading through her. "You earned it," Silas said, settling into the chair opposite her. He ate with a quiet focus, his gaze occasionally drifting towards the flames dancing behind the stove's glass door. A comfortable silence settled between them, punctuated only by the sounds of their eating and the rhythmic ticking of a grandfather clock in the corner. Dusty found herself studying Silas, the lines etched around his eyes, the way his jaw tightened when he was deep in thought. He was a man of few words, but she sensed a depth beneath the surface, a story waiting to be told. Finally, Silas set down his spoon. "So," he began, his voice a low rumble, "tell me about this dedication. What makes a woman risk life and limb for a few head of cattle?" Dusty chuckled softly. "A few head? Those were my few heads, Silas. Everything I own. Besides, it's more than just owning them. It's a connection, a responsibility. They depend on me." She paused, searching for the right words. "My grandpa, he raised cattle. Taught me everything I know. It's in my blood, I guess. A stubborn streak, maybe." Silas leaned back in his chair, a hint of a smile playing on his lips. "Stubborn, huh? I might have noticed." Dusty grinned. "And you, Silas? What brought you to Wyoming?" "This ranch, it feels like it's been in your family for generations." He hesitated for a moment, his gaze clouding over with a flicker of sadness. "It has. My grandfather homesteaded here. Built it up from nothing. My father, he wasn't much of a rancher. Preferred chasing dreams in the city. Left me the ranch when I was barely old enough to shave." He chuckled, a humorless sound. "I had no idea what I was doing. Learned everything the hard way. Still learning, I suppose." Dusty reached across the table and placed her hand over his. His hand was callous and strong, the warmth surprising. "We all are," she said softly. He looked at her, his eyes searching hers. He turned his hand over, his fingers interlacing with hers. A spark ignited within her, a warmth that had nothing to do with the stove. They sat in silence for a moment, their hands intertwined. Then Silas cleared his throat and pulled his hand away, a faint blush rising on his cheeks. He stood up and walked over to the stove, tossing another log into the fire. "My turn to tell a story," he said, his back to her. "Did I ever tell you about the time I tried to raise sheep?" Dusty laughed, the sound echoing through the room. "Sheep? You? I can't picture it." Silas turned around, a genuine smile on his face. "It was a disaster. They were constantly escaping. And the coyotes, don't even get me started on the coyotes. He launched into a tale of woolly chaos, of tangled fences and sleepless nights, of one particularly stubborn ram named Bartholomew who seemed to have a personal vendetta against him. Dusty listened, captivated, her laughter growing louder with each ridiculous detail. He described Bartholomew's escape attempts, his voice animated, his eyes sparkling with amusement. He told of chasing the errant sheep across the fields in the dead of night, armed with nothing but a flashlight and a prayer. Dusty wiped tears from her eyes, her sides aching from laughter. "Oh, Silas," she gasped, "you should write a book." He shook his head, still smiling. "Some stories are best left untold. Or at least, embellished around a pot-bellied stove." The fire crackled merrily, casting dancing shadows on the walls. The stew had long been finished, but the warmth of the food and the companionship lingered. As the evening wore on, they continued to share stories, their laughter filling the room, chasing away the chill of the Wyoming winter and weaving a new tapestry of shared experiences. A tapestry woven with threads of hardship, resilience, and the unexpected comfort of finding a kindred spirit in the most unlikely of places. Trapped. The wind howled like a banshee, clawing at the windows of the ranch house. Snow, thick and blinding, plastered itself against the glass, turning the world outside into a swirling white abyss. Dusty shivered, despite the roaring fire in the hearth. Last night's companionable warmth felt like a distant memory replaced by a growing unease. "Looks like we're snowed in good and proper," Silas said, his voice a low rumble that barely cut through the wind. He stood at the window, his broad shoulders silhouetted against the storm. "Radio's down too. Power lines must be out." Dusty hobbled over to the window, her crutches sinking slightly into the thick rug. The barn was barely visible, a ghostly outline swallowed by the blizzard. The thought of being completely cut off, reliant solely on Silas, tightened a knot in her stomach. It wasn't that she didn't trust him, far from it. But the idea of being helpless, of being a burden, was a bitter pill to swallow. "How long do you think it'll last?" she asked, her voice barely audible. Silas turned, his expression grim. "Hard to say. Could be a day, could be 3. This is a bad one." He walked to the fireplace and poked at the logs, sending a shower of sparks up the chimney. "I've got plenty of firewood and food. We'll be fine, Dusty. Don't you worry." Easy for him to say. He was strong, capable, and used to this. She, on the other hand, was hobbled, inexperienced with true isolation, and more than a little scared. She forced a smile. "Just thinking about the cattle. Hope they're weathering it okay. They're tough animals. They'll hunker down in the lee of the barn." He paused, then added, "I should probably check on them later, make sure they're all right." The thought of him venturing out into that maelstrom sent a fresh wave of anxiety through her. "Don't be ridiculous, Silas. You'll freeze out there. They'll be fine." He met her gaze, his eyes unreadable. "Maybe, but I won't be able to rest easy until I know for sure." The day crawled by. The storm raged on, a relentless assault of wind and snow. Dusty tried to distract herself by reading, but the words blurred before her eyes. She kept glancing at the window, her anxiety growing with each gust of wind. In the late afternoon, she decided to move from the living room to her bedroom to grab a book. As she navigated the narrow hallway, one of her crutches snagged on the edge of a rug. There was a sickening crack, and the crutch buckled beneath her weight. She cried out, instinctively grabbing for the wall, but it was too late. She landed heavily on the floor, her injured ankle screaming in protest. Silas was beside her in an instant, his face etched with concern. "Dusty, are you all right?" He knelt beside her, gently helping her sit up. She examined the broken crutch, a wave of despair washing over her. It was snapped clean through, rendering it useless. The other one looked precarious too, weakened by the constant use. "Great," she muttered, her voice laced with frustration. "Just great." Silas's expression softened. "Don't worry. I'll see if I can fix it." He took the broken crutch and examined it closely. After a moment, he shook his head. "I can try to splint it, but it won't be strong enough to hold your weight. Not for long anyway." She looked at the broken crutch, then up at Silas. The realization of her predicament hit her hard. She was completely and utterly dependent on him now. The thought made her feel sick. "So, what am I supposed to do?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. "Just stay put? In this room?" Silas frowned. "Of course not. I'll help you get around. It's just, you'll need to take it easy. Try not to put too much weight on that ankle." He helped her to her feet, supporting her weight as she hobbled back to the living room. Every step sent a jolt of pain through her ankle. She sank into the armchair by the fire, feeling utterly defeated. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice barely a whisper. I'm such a burden. Silas knelt beside her, taking her hand in his. His touch was warm and reassuring. Don't you ever say that, Dusty. You're not a burden. Not at all. He squeezed her hand gently, his gaze meeting hers. We'll get through this together. Just like we got through the storm. But even as he said the words, Dusty couldn't shake the feeling of helplessness. She was trapped, not just by the storm, but by her own limitations. Trapped with a man who was becoming increasingly important to her, a man she didn't want to burden but couldn't avoid doing so. The fire crackled merrily, but the warmth didn't reach the chill that had settled deep in her bones. The gift of strength. The rhythmic rasp of Silas's draw knife sliced through the air, a steady counterpoint to the howling wind still battering the ranch house. Dusty watched him from her armchair, the firelight dancing across the determined set of his jaw. He was shaping oak, shavings curling like golden ribbons at his feet. The air hung thick with the scent of wood and linseed oil. What are you making? She asked, though she suspected she already knew. He glanced up, a brief smile softening his features. Something a bit sturdier than that pine you were using. Oak'll take a beating. Figured you could use a proper set of crutches. Dusty's throat tightened. It wasn't just the practicality of his actions, it was the care woven into every deliberate stroke. He wasn't just replacing a broken tool, he was investing in her independence, her future. She looked away, suddenly self-conscious, the warmth of the fire doing little to soothe the flush creeping up her neck. Hours later, as dusk painted the windows a bruised purple, Silas stood before her, holding out the finished crutches. They were beautiful. The oak gleamed, smooth and polished. He'd even carved small, intricate patterns into the hand grips, stylized cattle brands she didn't recognize. Go on, he urged, a hint of anticipation in his voice. Try them out. Hesitantly, Dusty reached for them, the weight of the oak solid and reassuring in her hands. She adjusted the height, Silas watching with a critical eye, and then, with a deep breath, she pushed herself up. The crutches felt right, balanced, secure. She took a tentative step, then another, the oak ringing softly against the wooden floor. A slow grin spread across her face. They're perfect, Silas. Thank you. He beamed, his eyes crinkling at the corners. There's more. He gestured towards the window where Copper stood saddled in the yard, his breath misting in the frigid air. Confusion furrowed Dusty's brow. What's he doing out there? Figured you might be getting a little stir-crazy stuck inside, Silas said, grabbing her coat. And those calves aren't going to find themselves. He helped her into her coat, his hands lingering a moment longer than necessary on her shoulders. Then he led her outside, the wind biting at her exposed skin. Copper shifted nervously, his ears twitching, but Silas calmed him with a gentle hand. As they approached, Dusty noticed something different about the saddle. It was padded with extra cushioning and a low back support had been added. What's all this? Thought it might be a little easier on you, Silas said, his voice low. It's not pretty, but it should keep you comfortable. He didn't wait for her to protest. With a strength that still surprised her, he lifted her onto Coppa's back, carefully positioning her so that the support cradled her injured leg. The familiar scent of horse flesh and leather filled her nostrils, and a sense of exhilaration, long dormant, began to stir within her. Now, Silas said, taking the reins, we'll take it slow. Just get a feel for it. He led Copper around the yard, Dusty gripping the saddle horn, her knuckles white. The wind whipped at her face, but for the first time in weeks, she felt alive. With each circuit, she grew more confident, her grip loosening, her posture straightening. You're doing great, Silas said, his voice a warm rumble in her ear. He's a good horse, Copper is. Gentle. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in fiery hues, Silas stopped Copper near the gate. That's enough for today. Don't want to overdo it. Dusty nodded, her cheeks flushed with exertion and something else, something warmer, something she couldn't quite name. As Silas dismounted her, he paused, his hand lingering on her waist. You know, he said, his gaze meeting hers, you're stronger than you think, Dusty. Don't ever forget that. She looked at him, at the genuine concern etched on his face, and for the first time she believed it. Maybe, just maybe, she wasn't as helpless as she felt. Maybe with Silas's help she could find her strength again, not in spite of her injury, but because of it. Whispers in town. The aroma of roasting coffee wrestled and mostly lost against the saloon's lingering bouquet of flat beer and stale dreams. Silas usually filtered out the saloon's backdrop, the murmur of voices, the tinkling of glass, the rhythmic slap of playing cards. Today, though, it felt like a persistent cloud of midges, a relentless irritation he couldn't shake. He'd come for salt licks, delayed in transit, leaving him marooned with a tepid brew and Hank Miller. Hank, perched on a stool like a carrion bird eyeing a fresh kill, held court. Silas struggled to ignore him, swirling the amber liquid in his glass, but Miller's gravelly pronouncements cut through the air. Here Silas took in that dusty girl, Hank crowed, his voice a rusty hinge screeching open. Said she was starving. More like he just couldn't resist playing knight in shining armor. Especially with certain attributes. A snicker rippled through Hank's small audience. Silas felt his jaw clench. He told himself to ignore the bait. Hank thrived on disruption and Silas had more pressing concerns. And those crutches he fashioned for her? Real fancy work. Oak, wasn't it? Bet he's planning on keeping her close. Maybe she'll be his new cook. Or something else. Hank punctuated the remark with a lascivious wink. A man alone this long gets needs, you know? The answering laughter possessed a sharper, more knowing edge. Silas's fingers tightened around his glass, the rising heat in his cheeks mirroring the simmering rage within. Enough. He set the glass down with a decisive thunk that silenced the merriment. Turning, he pinned Hank with a gaze that could freeze whiskey. The jocularity vanished from Hank's face, replaced by a flicker of something akin to apprehension. Something you want to articulate, Hank? Silas's voice was a low growl, barely contained. A heavy stillness descended, the saloon holding its breath. Hank squirmed on his perch. Just jawing, Silas. No offense meant. His eyes, however, darted around like trapped sparrows. Offense is precisely what you intended, Silas countered, advancing. Spreading falsehoods and slurring a woman unable to defend herself. You think that's amusing, Hank? You think that's just? Hank stuttered, I didn't mean anything by it. Yes, you did, Silas stated, his voice unwavering. You aimed to be spiteful. You intended to demean Dusty and question my character. And frankly, I'm weary of it. Weary of the pettiness, the envy, the constant need to diminish others to elevate yourselves. He paused, drawing a slow breath. Dusty is under my roof and she deserves dignity. She's endured trials you wouldn't comprehend. And she's faced them with a grace and fortitude that shames you all. Silas turned his back, dismissing Hank. He settled his tab, the bartender pointedly avoiding eye contact, and marched out, the saloon doors groaning in protest. The frigid air struck him like a bomb, clearing the stagnant air from his lungs. He mounted Duke and nudged him into a trot, homeward bound. The wind lashed at his face, carrying the scent of pine and imminent snow. He hadn't realized how deeply Hank's venom had sunk. It wasn't merely defending Dusty's honor, it was the unsettling truth that Hank's insinuations had hit their mark. His attraction to Dusty wasn't rooted in pity or isolation, but in her indomitable spirit, her tenacious will. He admired her grit, her deep understanding of the land, her deft handling of livestock. And, yes, he conceded, he found her captivating. He envisioned her smile, the laugh lines that fanned out from her eyes, the quiet resolution in her voice. He remembered evenings spent by the hearth, sharing stories and silences, a comfortable intimacy growing between them. Was it conceivable that he was falling for her? The prospect was both intoxicating and terrifying. He'd spent years barricading his heart, accepting solitude as his fate. But Dusty had steadily dismantled those defenses, brick by brick. She had rekindled a spark in his life, and he found himself anticipating each sunrise, each new challenge. He urged Duke into a gallop, the wind screaming past his ears. He needed to contemplate. He needed to determine his desires. And he needed to summon the courage to risk his heart again, even if it meant confronting the specter of heartbreak. A new beginning. The morning after the tense standoff at the saloon arrived keen and bright, the recent blizzard now a ghost remembered only in the monumental snowdrifts that contoured the landscape. Silas discovered Dusty in the barn, her touch surprisingly delicate as she attended to a newborn calf. He always found himself captivated by that contrast of strength and care. He lingered by a stall, observing her. Dusty, he started, his voice a shade gruffer than intended. Her gaze lifted, questioning. Morning, Silas. Sleep well. He pushed off the wood, closing the gap between them. Taking her hands in his, he was surprised by their chill despite the relative warmth within the barn. There's something I need to ask, he revealed, his thumbs gently caressing her skin. He inhaled deeply, the long-contemplated words finally tumbling out. Dusty, this might feel abrupt, particularly after everything. But would you do me the honor of becoming my wife? Her breath caught in her throat. The familiar bloom in her cheeks vanished, leaving her complexion ashen. For a heartbeat, he feared he had gravely misjudged their connection, that his rough proposal had shattered something delicate. He hurried to clarify, I know I'm a difficult man. Rooted in my ways, stubborn as a mule. But I admire you, Dusty. Your fortitude, your resilience, the very essence of your heart. They surpass anything I deserve. And I promise you this, I will dedicate every breath I take to earning your love and devotion. Silence pressed down, punctuated only by the soft mooing of the cattle. Then, a lone tear tracked down her cheek, soon followed by a cascade, until her face glistened. But through the tears blossomed a smile, radiant and joyous. "Yes, Silas," she breathed, her voice thick with emotion. "Yes, I will." He drew her close, burying his face in the fragrant thickness of her hair, a comforting blend of hay and horses. Relief surged through him as he held her, a weight lifted he hadn't realized he was bearing. He had never felt so exposed, so overwhelmingly happy. Their wedding was a humble affair, reflecting their shared sensibilities. A space was cleared in the barn. The clean scent of fresh hay interwoven with the wild fragrance of wildflowers Dusty had painstakingly gathered, despite the snow's lingering presence. The animals, their quiet audience, observed with gentle interest. A small gathering of intimates, ranch hands, the town blacksmith, and even Mrs. Olson from the general store, came to celebrate. Judge Carter, known for his conciseness and resonant voice, officiated, his words simple, yet imbued with the genuine spirit of the couple before him. Dusty wore a simple dress of cream-colored linen, defined at the waist by a leather belt Silas had painstakingly fashioned. Her hair, normally confined in practical braids, flowed freely down her back in graceful waves. Silas, usually seen in weathered denim, wore a pressed, dark suit, looking slightly awkward, yet undeniably distinguished. As they exchanged vows, their voices trembled with feeling. When Judge Carter declared them husband and wife, a wave of cheers erupted from the small assembly. Silas gently raised Dusty's veil, revealing a face alight with joy. Their kiss was unhurried, tender, a pledge of a future forged on mutual respect and unwavering affection. The celebration that followed rang with laughter, music, and the comforting aromas of homemade fare. Mrs. Olson had contributed a cake, its frosting endearingly imperfect but utterly delicious. The ranch hands played spirited melodies on fiddles and harmonicas, their music resonating through the barn, saturating the space with cheer. As dusk settled, painting long shadows across the snow-dusted fields, Silas escorted Dusty outside. They stood together, hand in hand, watching the sky ignite in a blaze of color. "A new chapter," Dusty murmured, resting her head against his shoulder. "A fresh start," Silas echoed, squeezing her hand. He gazed out at his ranch, at the land etched into his soul, then at the woman beside him, his heart brimming with a love he hadn't conceived possible. He knew challenges lay ahead. Ranch life was never without its trials. But he also knew that united, they could weather any storm. He had discovered his sanctuary, not only in this rugged terrain, but within the very heart of the woman at his side. He knew with unwavering conviction that their life together would be an unfolding adventure, and he was eager to begin.